Most people spend their lives as leaves in the wind, blown this way, and that by every gust that comes along. A rude comment from a coworker, a traffic jam, a bill in the mail, and their whole day is ruined. Their mood, their productivity, their sense of well-being, all at the mercy of external events. Is that any way to live? I don't think so. Now, I'm not suggesting you become unrealistic. The challenges we face are real. The obstacles in our path are real. The disappointments in life are very real, but what I am suggesting is that you develop the extraordinary ability to choose your response regardless of the circumstance. That, my friends, is the hallmark of a life well lived. In my many years working with successful people across every industry imaginable, I've observed something fascinating. The most successful among them have mastered this very skill. They've learned to act as if nothing affects them. They're like the mighty oak tree that may bend in the strongest storm but never breaks. They've developed emotional discipline. Let me share with you the foundation of this kind of emotional mastery. It begins with understanding a simple truth: events are neutral until you assign meaning to them. Did you hear that? Events are neutral until you assign meaning to them. The traffic jam isn't good or bad until you decide it is. The critical comment from your boss isn't devastating until you make it so. The unexpected bill isn't a disaster until you choose to see it that way. This perspective changes everything, doesn't it? When you truly understand that you are the author of your emotional experience, not the world around you, you've taken the first step toward freedom. I remember a gentleman I met years ago. He had lost everything in a business venture gone wrong. His partners had abandoned him, his creditors were calling, and his financial security was in shambles. By all accounts, he had every reason to be devastated. And yet when I met him, do you know what he said to me? He said, "Jim, this is the best thing that could have happened to me." I was stunned. How could financial ruin be the best thing to happen to anyone? He explained, "I've discovered what I'm made of. I've discovered who my true friends are. I've discovered what really matters in life. And I've discovered that I can start over, that I have the resilience to rebuild. These are lessons I couldn't have learned any other way." Now that's what I call emotional mastery. That's acting as if nothing can truly harm your spirit, your resolve, your determination to make something magnificent of your life. So how do we develop this kind of inner strength? Let me offer you a few disciplines that, practiced daily, will transform your emotional life. First, guard your mind as you would guard your most precious possession, because it is. Be careful what you allow in. The news, the opinions of others, the negativity that seems to permeate our world, all of it is vying for space in your mind. And what occupies your mind shapes your emotions. So be selective. Choose deliberately what you expose yourself to. Here's a discipline I've practiced for decades. Begin each day with positive input. Before the demands of the day come rushing in, before the problems present themselves, fill your mind with wisdom, with inspiration, with ideas that elevate your thinking. Read biographies of great men and women who overcame tremendous obstacles. Study philosophy. Immerse yourself in thoughts that strengthen rather than weaken your resolve. Second, develop the habit of asking better questions. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions. When something challenging happens, and it will, most people immediately ask disempowering questions like, "Why does this always happen to me?" Or "What's wrong with me?" Or "Who's to blame?" These questions lead nowhere good. Instead, train yourself to ask questions like, "What can I learn from this?" Or "How can I use this to become stronger?" Or "What opportunity might be hidden in this challenge?" The questions you habitually ask shape your focus, and your focus determines your emotional state. I once worked with a woman who had been passed over for a promotion she desperately wanted. She was initially crushed, but instead of dwelling on the injustice, she asked herself, "What skills do I need to develop to ensure I get the next opportunity?" That question led her to seek additional training, to find a mentor, and to volunteer for projects that would showcase her abilities. Within a year, she was promoted to an even better position than the one she had initially wanted. The right questions changed everything. Third, understand that emotional mastery comes from having a compelling future. When you're genuinely excited about where you're going, the disappointments along the way don't devastate you. They're merely temporary setbacks on the road to your destination. Most people live with no clear vision for their future. Is it any wonder they're knocked off course by every little wind that blows? But when you have clarity about your destination, when you can see in your mind's eye the life you're creating, you develop a remarkable resilience to the little things that derail others. So take the time to design your future. Not just vague notions, but specific, compelling images of what you want your life to be in every area. Your health, your relationships, your career, your finances, your spiritual life. The more vivid this vision, the more it will It will pull you forward despite obstacles. Fourth, and this is crucial, develop the discipline of managing your physical state. Your body and your emotions are inextricably linked. It's nearly impossible to feel depressed when you're physically energized. It's difficult to feel fearful when you're standing tall with your shoulders back and breathing deeply. This is why I've always been an advocate for physical discipline. Regular exercise, proper nutrition, adequate rest, these aren't just good for your health, they're essential for your emotional resilience. When you feel physically strong, you're more likely to feel emotionally strong as well. Try this experiment. The next time you feel emotionally low, change your physiology dramatically. Stand up straight, throw your shoulders back, lift your chin, put a smile on your face even if you don't feel like it, and move with purpose and energy. Hold that position for just 2 minutes while breathing deeply. I guarantee your emotional state will shift. It's a simple technique, but remarkably effective. Fifth, develop the habit of keeping your word to yourself. Most people break promises to themselves without a second thought. They say they'll start exercising tomorrow, but they don't. They promise themselves they'll save money this month, but they don't. They commit to reading more, but they don't follow through. Each broken promise chips away at your self-trust. And when you don't trust yourself, how can you possibly develop the inner strength needed to act as if nothing affects you? Begin rebuilding that trust by making small commitments to yourself and keeping them no matter what. These small victories create momentum that leads to bigger victories. 6, surround yourself with the right influences. You become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That's not just a clever saying, it's a profound truth. If you're surrounded by people who are easily affected by every little setback, guess what? You likely will be too. Seek out individuals who demonstrate emotional resilience, who maintain their composure under pressure, who see opportunities where others see only problems. Their attitudes will rub off on you, their perspectives will influence yours, their strength will help develop your own. I remember a young entrepreneur who joined a mastermind group I was leading years ago. When he first joined, he was reactive, easily discouraged, and quick to blame circumstances for his lack of success. But within that group were several individuals who had mastered emotional self-regulation. They faced the same market conditions, the same competitive pressures, the same potential for rejection, but their responses were worlds apart. Over time, almost imperceptibly, this young man began to change. His language shifted from "I can't" because to "how can I?" His focus moved from problems to solutions. His emotional responses became more measured, more productive. The influence of the group had transformed him. 7th, practice gratitude with religious fervor. It's impossible to feel grateful and negatively affected at the same time. The two states cannot coexist. When you train yourself to look for things to be grateful for, you automatically shift your focus from what's wrong to what's right. And that shift changes everything. Most people have their gratitude conditional on circumstances. When things are going well, they feel grateful. But the true masters of emotional resilience practice gratitude, especially when things aren't going well. They understand that gratitude isn't just an emotion, it's a discipline to be practiced regardless of external conditions. Try this. At the end of each day, identify 3 things that happen that you're grateful for. They don't have to be momentous, a beautiful sunset, a kind word from a stranger, a problem solved at work. The simple act of looking for things to be grateful for trains your mind to see possibility and positivity where others see only problems. 8th, become a lifelong student of wisdom. The challenges you face today have been faced by countless others throughout history. Their insights, their solutions, their perspectives are available to you through books, through teachings, through the accumulated wisdom of centuries. When you study philosophy, when you examine the lives of great men and women, when you expose yourself to the best thinking humanity has produced, you develop a broader perspective. You begin to see your own challenges within the greater context of human experience. And that perspective gives you the emotional distance needed to respond rather than react. I've often said that formal education will make you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. Part of that fortune is emotional resilience, the ability to act as if nothing affects you because you have the wisdom to see beyond the immediate circumstance to the greater opportunity. 9th, understand the power of interpretation. The events of your life have no inherent meaning until you give them meaning. A rejection can be devastating or it can be redirecting. A failure can be final or it can be feedback. A loss can be the end or it can be a beginning. The meaning isn't in the event, it's in your interpretation of the event. Most people interpret events automatically, unconsciously based on past conditioning and current fears. But what if you took control of your interpretations? What if you deliberately chose empowering meanings for the events of your life? I worked with a sales professional who had been turned down by a potential client. He was initially dejected, interpreting the rejection as a statement about his abilities. But with some coaching, he reinterpreted the experience. This isn't a rejection of me. It's simply information that my offering wasn't the right fit for this particular time. Now I can focus my energy on finding the right fit. That reinterpretation allowed him to maintain his enthusiasm, his confidence, and his momentum. He wasn't affected by the rejection because he chose a meaning that empowered rather than diminished him. 10th, develop the discipline of immediate response to adversity. When something challenging happens, there's a brief window of opportunity, sometimes just moments, where you get to choose your response. Most people miss this window. They react automatically based on past conditioning rather than responding deliberately based on their highest values. The masters of emotional resilience have developed the habit of pausing in that crucial moment. They take a breath. They step back mentally. They remember who they are and what they stand for. And then they choose a response that aligns with their best self rather than their most reactive self. This discipline alone can transform your experience of life. Instead of being at the mercy of external events, you become the author of your own emotional experience. That's freedom. That's power. 11th, learn to see challenges as the price of progress. Nothing worthwhile comes without cost. The path to any worthy goal is paved with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. This isn't the exception, it's the rule. When you understand this fundamental truth, you stop being surprised by difficulties. You stop interpreting them as signs that something is wrong or that you're on the wrong path. Instead, you see them simply as the natural terrain on the road to achievement. I remember a conversation with a successful business owner who told me, Jim, I used to get discouraged when problems arose in my business. I'd think, when will these problems end? Now, I understand the problems never end. They just change. Problem solving isn't something I have to do until I reach success. Problem solving is success. It's the very substance of achievement. That perspective changes everything, doesn't it? When challenges no longer surprise or discourage you, you've taken a giant step toward acting as if nothing affects you. 12th, develop the habit of contribution. When you're focused on giving, on adding value, on making a difference in the lives of others, you naturally become less consumed with your own temporary discomforts and disappointments. Most people live self-centered lives. Their primary questions are, what am I getting? And how am I feeling? And what's happening to me? This focus makes them vulnerable to every shift in circumstance, every piece of negative feedback, every momentary discomfort. But when you shift your focus to contribution, when your primary questions become, what am I giving? And how can I help? And what difference am I making? You develop a natural resilience to the ups and downs of life. Your sense of purpose transcends your temporary emotions. I've noticed this pattern in every truly successful person I've known. They're not immune to disappointment or frustration or doubt. They experience these emotions just like everyone else. The difference is these emotions don't stop them because they're driven by something bigger than their feelings. They're driven by their commitment to contribution. 13th, master the art of detached involvement. This may sound paradoxical, but it's a concept I've observed in the most emotionally resilient individuals. They're fully engaged in their pursuits, passionate, committed all in. And yet, simultaneously, they maintain a certain detachment from outcomes. They understand that while they can control their efforts, their preparation, their responses, they cannot control all the variables that determine results. So they focus intensely on what they can control, and they release attachment to what they cannot. This balanced perspective allows them to act as if nothing affects them because they're not hanging their emotional well-being on outcomes that are partially beyond their control. They can experience disappointment without being devastated. They can face setbacks without being derailed. I coached a professional athlete who embodied this principle beautifully. Before each competition, he would say to himself, I prepared thoroughly. I'll give my absolute best effort. Beyond that, whatever happens, happens. This wasn't resignation, it was wisdom. It allowed him to perform at his peak without the burden of emotional attachment to a specific outcome. 14th, develop financial reserves. Now this may seem out of place in a discussion about emotional resilience, but I've observed that financial pressure is one of the most common sources of emotional distress. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, when you have no margin for the unexpected, you're vulnerable to being affected by circumstances beyond your control. Building financial reserves isn't just good economics, it's good emotional management. When you know you can weather financial storms, you naturally feel more secure, more confident, less at the mercy of external events. This doesn't mean you need to be wealthy to be emotionally resilient. But it does mean that having some financial margin, living below your means, and gradually building reserves should be part of your strategy for developing the ability to act as if nothing affects you. 15th, cultivate a sense of humor. Life is filled with ironies, contradictions, and absurdities. The ability to laugh, especially at yourself, is a powerful antidote to taking things too seriously. I've always been impressed by individuals who can find humor in difficult situations. It's not that they don't recognize the seriousness of their challenges, they do. But they also recognize that maintaining perspective, including the ability to laugh, keeps them from being overwhelmed. A good laugh releases tension, shifts perspective, and reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously. It's one of the most underrated tools for emotional resilience. 16th, practice the discipline of completion. Unfinished tasks, incomplete projects, uncomplete conflicts, all of these drain your emotional energy and make you more vulnerable to being affected by new challenges. Develop the habit of completion. Finish what you start. Resolve what's unresolved. Clear the deck so you have the emotional energy to respond effectively to what's in front of you now. This might mean having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. It might mean completing the project that's been lingering on your to-do list. It might mean making a decision you've been postponing. Whatever it is, complete it and free yourself from the emotional drag it creates. 17th, become comfortable with discomfort. Most people organize their lives around the avoidance of discomfort. They make decisions based not on what would be most effective or what would lead to the greatest growth, but on what would be most comfortable in the moment. This approach guarantees a life of limitation. Growth happens at the edge of your comfort zone, not within it. The ability to act as if nothing affects you is developed precisely by putting yourself in situations that challenge you, that stretch you, that initially make you uncomfortable. I often advise people to deliberately do something each day that makes them uncomfortable, to volunteer for that presentation, that makes them nervous, to initiate that conversation they've been avoiding, to attempt that skill they fear they can't master. Each time you move through discomfort rather than around it, you develop emotional muscle. 18th, learn to forgive others and yourself. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It affects you far more than it affects the object of your resentment. The inability to forgive keeps you emotionally tethered to past hurts, past disappointments, past injustices. The art of acting as if nothing affects you requires the ability to release what happened yesterday so it doesn't contaminate your experience of today. This doesn't mean you condone harmful actions or that you don't learn from past experiences. It simply means you refuse to carry the emotional burden of resentment into your present and future. This includes forgiving yourself. Many people are harder on themselves than they are on anyone else. They replay their mistakes, their failures, their poor choices again and again, punishing themselves emotionally long after the event has passed. This self-punishment makes them vulnerable to being affected by new challenges because they're already carrying such a heavy emotional load. Learning to forgive, to truly release both others and yourself from the burden of past actions, creates emotional freedom that is essential to resilience. 19th, develop strategic ignorance. Not everything deserves your attention or your emotional energy. The 24-hour news cycle, the constant stream of social media, the opinions of people who don't share your values or your aspirations, all of these can affect your emotional state if you allow them in. The most emotionally resilient people I know practice strategic ignorance. They're not uninformed about matters of importance, but they're deliberately selective about what information they consume and what opinions they give weight to. This isn't burying your head in the sand. It's being intentional about where you direct your limited attention and emotional energy. It's recognizing that what you allow into your mind inevitably affects how you feel and how you perform. 20th, embrace uncertainty. Much of our emotional distress comes from the desire for certainty in a world that is inherently uncertain. We want guarantees before we act. We want assurances before we commit. We want to know exactly how things will turn out before we begin. But life doesn't work that way. The most meaningful pursuits involve risk, uncertainty, the possibility of both success and failure. When you learn to embrace uncertainty rather than fear it, you develop a natural immunity to being negatively affected by it. The most successful entrepreneurs I've known share this trait. They're not reckless, they do their research, they prepare thoroughly, they mitigate risks where possible. But they don't demand certainty before they act. They understand that certainty is an illusion, and the pursuit of it leads to paralysis rather than progress. Learning to act in the face of uncertainty, to move forward without guarantees, to embrace the adventure of not knowing exactly how things will turn out, this is essential to acting as if nothing affects you. Because the truth is, uncertainty affects everyone. The difference is in how you respond to it. 21st, practice the art of reframing. The ability to see the same situation from a different perspective is perhaps the most powerful tool for emotional resilience. When you can reframe a challenge as an opportunity, a setback as a setup for a comeback, a rejection as a redirect challenge, you change your emotional experience without changing the external reality. This isn't positive thinking in the sense of denying reality or pretending things are different than they are. It's positive thinking in the sense of finding the most empowering perspective on what is actually happening. I remember working with a business owner whose largest client had just terminated their contract. His initial frame was catastrophic. This was a disaster that threatened the very survival of his business. But with some coaching, he reframed the situation. This is an opportunity to diversify our client base so we're never again so dependent on a single customer. It's also a chance to examine our service model to see if there are improvements we can make. That reframe didn't change the external reality. The client was still gone. The revenue was still lost. But it completely changed his emotional response and the actions he took as a result. Instead of panic and desperation, he approached the situation with curiosity and determination. And within 6 months, his business was stronger than ever. 22nd, learn the art of emotional acceptance. Many people fight against their negative emotions, which only gives those emotions more power. They feel anxious, and then they feel anxious about feeling anxious. They feel disappointed, and then they beat themselves up for feeling disappointed. Emotional acceptance doesn't mean you enjoy negative emotions or that you don't work to move beyond them. It simply means you acknowledge them without judgment. I'm feeling anxious right now, and that's okay. It's a normal human emotion. This simple acknowledgement often takes away much of the emotion's power to affect your behavior. The most emotionally resilient people I know aren't those who never feel negative emotions. They're those who accept those emotions as temporary weather patterns, passing through rather than defining characteristics of who they are. 23rd, develop multiple sources of identity. If your sense of self is tied to a single role or achievement, your job, your relationship status, your athletic ability, your appearance, then a setback in that area becomes devastating. It doesn't just affect what you do, it affects who you are. The art of acting as if nothing affects you requires developing a multifaceted identity, seeing yourself as many things rather than just one thing. You're not just a professional, you're also a parent, a friend, a community member, a person with hobbies and interests and values that transcend any single role. When you have multiple sources of identity, a setback in one area doesn't devastate your entire sense of self. You have emotional resilience because your identity isn't tied to any single outcome or role. I worked with a professional whose entire identity was wrapped up in her career. When she was passed over for a promotion, it crushed not just her professional aspirations, but her very sense of who she was. Through our work together, she developed other aspects of her identity, her role as a mentor, her creativity expressed through art, her contributions to her community. Not only did this make her happier and more well-rounded, but ironically, it also made her more effective professionally because she no longer approached her career with the desperate need for validation that had actually been holding her back. 24th, learn to distinguish between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in life. Disappointments happen, losses occur, plans go awry, bodies age, relationships end. This is the nature of life in an imperfect world. But suffering is different from pain. Suffering comes from our resistance to pain, our interpretation of pain, our identification with pain. This shouldn't be happening. I can't bear this. This means there's something wrong with me. These are the thoughts that transform pain into suffering. The art of acting as if nothing affects you doesn't mean you don't experience pain. It means you've learned not to add suffering to pain through resistant thoughts and catastrophic interpretations. You've learned to say, this hurts and I accept that hurt as part of life. I'll move through it rather than being defined by it. 25th, develop the habit of taking immediate action. When something challenging happens, the worst response is often paralysis, becoming so overwhelmed by the event that you do nothing. This passivity reinforces the feeling that you're at the mercy of external circumstances. The alternative is to take immediate action, however small. You can't control what happened, but you can control what you do next. This shift from passive victim to active responder changes your emotional experience dramatically. I remember a business owner whose store had been damaged in a natural disaster. While others in similar situations were paralyzed by shock and dismay, he immediately took action, calling his insurance company, contacting contractors, reaching out to employees, communicating with customers. None of these actions changed what had happened, but they completely changed his experience of the event. Instead of feeling helpless, he felt purposeful. Instead of being overwhelmed, he was focused. The habit of immediate action in the face of adversity is perhaps the most visible manifestation of acting as if nothing affects you. It's not that you don't recognize the severity of the situation, it's that you refuse to be paralyzed by it. 26th, master the skill of presence. Much of our emotional distress comes not from what's happening now, but from regretting what happened in the past or worrying about what might happen in the future. When you learn to be fully present in this moment, you naturally become less affected by anything outside this moment. This isn't mystical, it's practical. When your attention is fully in the present, there's simply no room for regret or worry. You're too engaged with what's in front of you, too absorbed in the task at hand, too connected to the person you're with to be affected by what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. The discipline of bringing yourself back to the present moment whenever you notice your mind wandering to past regrets or future concerns is foundational to emotional resilience. It's a skill that can be developed with practice, and it pays enormous dividends in your ability to act as if nothing affects you. 27th, develop philosophical depth. The ability to see your current circumstances within the broader context of human experience in the longer arc of time provides perspective that naturally leads to emotional resilience. When you study history, when you read the great philosophers, when you contemplate the vastness of the universe and the brevity of a single human life, your current challenges naturally take on a different proportion. This isn't to minimize legitimate difficulties, but to see them within a larger context that makes them more manageable. I've always been struck by how individuals with a philosophical bent tend to weather life's storms with greater equanimity. They've developed the habit of asking deeper questions. What can I learn from this? How does this fit into the larger pattern of my life? What wisdom might be available in this challenge? These questions lead to insights that transcend momentary discomfort. 28th, learn to distinguish between events and identity. When something challenging happens, most people unconsciously conflate the event with who they are. A rejection becomes I'm a rejected person. A failure becomes I'm a failure. A loss becomes I'm a loser. This conflation of event and identity is at the root of being affected by external circumstances. When you learn to make a clear distinction, this happened, but it is not who I am, you develop a natural immunity to being defined by external events. I worked with a writer who had received a harsh rejection from a publisher. Her immediate interpretation was, I'm not a real writer. I was fooling myself to think I could do this. With some coaching, she was able to reframe, my manuscript was rejected. That's an event that happened. It doesn't define who I am or what I'm capable of. That distinction allowed her to learn from the feedback without being devastated by it. She revised her manuscript and eventually found a publisher who was enthusiastic about her work. 29th, develop the skill of emotional intelligence. Understanding your own emotions and those of others gives you a level of mastery that prevents you from being blindsided by emotional reactions. Emotional intelligence includes the ability to recognize emotions as they arise, to understand their sources and their patterns, and to respond to them effectively rather than reactively. It's a skill set that can be developed with attention and practice. When you have high emotional intelligence, you're less likely to be hijacked by sudden emotions because you see them coming. You understand their triggers, their patterns, and their typical duration. This understanding gives you choices that people with lower emotional intelligence don't have. 30th, practice the art of letting go. Many people hold on too tightly to outcomes, to relationships, to possessions, to identities that no longer serve them. This tight grip makes them vulnerable to being affected when circumstances require change or release. The art of letting go doesn't mean you don't care or that you don't give your best effort. It means you've developed the wisdom to know when holding on causes more suffering than letting go. It means you've learned to release with grace rather than clinging with desperation. I remember a business owner who had invested years in a particular business model. Market conditions changed, technology evolved, and what had once been profitable was now draining resources. For months he held on tightly, trying to force the old model to work through sheer will and determination. But eventually he faced reality and let go. He pivoted to a new model that aligned with current conditions, and his business not only survived but thrived. The art of letting go, in this case, wasn't surrender, it was wisdom. And finally, understand that acting as if nothing affects you is not a destination but a journey. It's not about achieving a state of perfect emotional invulnerability that wouldn't be human or desirable. It's about developing day by day the inner resources to respond to life's challenges with wisdom, with perspective, with resilience. There will still be moments when you feel the full impact of disappointment, of loss, of rejection. That's part of the richness of human experience. The difference is these moments won't define you. They won't derail you. They won't determine the quality of your life. Because you've developed something stronger than circumstance. You've developed character. And character, my friends, is destiny. It's not what happens to you that determines the quality of your life. It's who you become in response to what happens. It's the inner resources you develop, the perspectives you cultivate, the habits you ingrain so deeply that they become your automatic response to whatever life brings. So today, make a commitment to begin this journey of emotional mastery. Start with one principle, one practice, one habit that resonates with you. Apply it consistently in your daily life. Watch how it begins to transform your experience, your resilience, your capacity to act as if nothing affects you, because you've developed something stronger than circumstance, an indomitable spirit, an unshakable character. An inner life so rich and so resilient that you're no longer at the mercy of external events. That, my friends, is freedom. That's power. That's a life well lived. Thank you.